Welcome to day 2 of the Seascape Symposium, connecting the seascape. It's brilliant. Was brilliant reflecting last night. We're listening to all the comments about, or the buzz from day 1 and how everyone had learnt something, but how, and we're, pushing forward, but yet grounded in being practical. So it's really good. So I hope we can repeat that today. I just would like to start today by actually thanking the co-organisers, the University of Portsmouth and University of Edinburgh, who are obviously powerhouses behind this, but also our match funders for the event, the Esme Fairbairn Foundation and the EU Life Plus, which comes through the Wetlands International European Association. But we'll crack on. So I'm delighted to be able to invite to introduce our keynote speaker for the day, Elisa Bayraktarov. Thank you, and I did bottle it. And Elise is a digital mover and shaker, and that's the thing, that's actually an award given in Australia for women in technology. So you can see she's obviously a pioneering female scientist, and she's coming to share her knowledge and experience today. And particularly it'll be about environmental monitoring and sort of developing solutions and problems to threatened species, but getting the data and science behind it and getting it right and getting it so that we're accessible and usable. And I'm always very impressed when I look at TNC data about how it is transparent and accessible and available. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing about it. So welcome to Elise, our digital diplomat.
Hello everyone, my name is Elisa Bayraktarov. I married 1.5 years ago. I could have been a holot, but I figured I've been annoying you guys for 40 years, so I can also annoy you for another 40, hopefully. So I've only recently started at TNC Australia as the data and science manager. And today I'm going to take you on a journey to Australia. I'm going to show you how TNC Australia are restoring shellfish reefs in the first part of my presentation. And in the second part of my presentation, I will show you some modeling work on how we are future-proofing marine coastal restoration. I should acknowledge that I'm giving this talk on behalf of Fiona Valesini, our former oceans lead at TNC Australia. And I'll do my absolutely best to try and match her passion and inspiration. She's an amazing leader. The second part of my presentation, the modeling work, was led by Vera Rulands, and we have received huge feedback and guidance from international experts like Jo Preston, like Melanie Bishop from Macquarie University, and also Simon Reeves from Shams in Saudi Arabia. So before I start, I'll do a very Australian thing, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which this work, on the lands and sea on which this work has been carried out. I acknowledge the past and present elders. Okay. Here the journey begins. For those of you who don't know TNC Australia, is there anyone here in the room who doesn't know TNC? Okay, so you probably know that we are operating over 80 countries and we have 5,000 staff. And as a science-based organization, of course, a fifth of our organization are scientists. And our global mission is to tackle climate change and prevent biodiversity loss. In Australia, what we do is turning something that looks like the picture on the left into that picture on the right. Vibrant, healthy shellfish reefs that are delivering ecosystem services. I would now like to tell you a little bit about how the TNC Australia Seascapes team are building shellfish reefs in Australia. So, the shellfish restoration work started as early as 2014, and it started with a big session to share lessons learned. TNC Australia brought into Australia experts from TNC in the US to learn from 50 years of shellfish restoration, the lessons learned, the failures made, and how we can improve knowing those lessons in Australia. The focus of restoration was on the temperate temperate southern ecosystems, because in Australia you may have heard most of the funding and R&D is going towards the Great Barrier Reef. So we do not restore corals in Australia, we restore shellfish and other ecosystems. At the same time, around 2014, there was also a very interesting paper by Heidi Alloway and Sean Connell that showed that alone on the coast of South Australia, a stretch of 5,000 kilometers of shellfish reefs were lost over the last 100 years. 5,000 kilometers, and that's just one of the states in Australia. And looking through the literature, TNC found out that, well, there has been an 85% loss in Sydney rock oyster, 99% of the Australian flat oyster, basically making those wild stocks functionally extinct. And so to reverse the decline and scale up, TNC introduced the Great Southern Seascape program in 2015 that was funded initially by a grant from the Thomas Foundation. So, and since then we've grown a lot. So in 2015, TNC started with some experimental reefs in Port Phillip Bay in Victoria and in Noosa in Queensland, experimental pilots to figure out how we do what we do. The first reefs were then built in 2017 in Victoria and Port Phillip Bay, and the instigators for this restoration was a recreational fishing club that was insisting restoration to happen there because they witnessed that the local mussel populations were declining as a consequence of unsustainable dredging. Then more reefs were added in the Windara location in South Australia. That was an example on how we can scale up restoration of up to 20 hectares. And then more reefs were added in Western Australia, in Oyster Harbour in 2019, and more reefs in Port Phillip Bay and in Victoria and in South Australia. And then something very interesting happened. In 2021, TNC was lucky to get a big grant to start the Reef Builder program. And within only 3 years, we got our restored ocean of up to 62 hectares, 21 big reefs that were more than half a hectare big, and at 28 locations. And our goals for 2030 are to, restore 60 reefs and 400 hectares. Can do, no problem, not a biggie. Okay, a little bit about Reef Builder. So that was a very impressive restoration program. It was a $20 million partnership between TNC and the Australian government, and it had a big focus on giving Australia's economy an economic boost, jobs and tourism and things like that. And also it was meant to give this economic boost after the COVID pandemic. And also in 2019, not sure if you guys have heard in the news, but 2019, Australia had some devastating bushfires that really have impacted the country a lot. So, and the map here shows in red the projects that were augmented during Reef Builder, and the blue ones are completely new projects that were carried out in this 3 years of funding. So Reef Builder was really an excellent example on how to scale up national shellfish restoration efforts and also giving the country an economic boost. During only 3 years, TNC and partners restored 40.5 hectares of reef. They deployed 100 tons of recycled shells that were collected from restaurants and cleaned and used as substrate, in addition to I don't know how many tons of limestone. The reefs were seeded with 30 million shellfish larvae from local hatcheries, aquaculture, and TNC divers and partners spent more than 1,000 hours underwater for restoration and monitoring. We had 300 volunteers were volunteering almost 3,000 hours of their time. And this one is very interesting. This restoration work over 3 years has created 425 jobs through engaging with 50 companies. And I'll take you on a little secret. End of the year, there may be an announcement of a small UN flagship project. So stay tuned. And what's next for us? What's the next phase of restoration? Well, I guess we probably wouldn't be TNC if we didn't have some absolutely ridiculously audacious goals. So we are working with the Australian government to restore 30% of Australia's shellfish reefs and help them meet our global biodiversity target. We want to build local capacity to scale up. We only have built 21 reefs. We have to build 39 more, so it's going to be scaling up, scaling up, scaling up. And also a big focus is on building reefs that last. Okay, now we need to scale up and accelerate our restoration efforts. Easier said than done. How the heck do we do that? So figuring out optimal locations for restorations projects to be carried out. Recognizing the appropriate environmental parameters for the species and ecosystems to restore. And also a big thing where we found a lot of barriers has been around logistical constraints, like getting permits, getting community buy-in, getting the funding, getting the project set up and kicked off the ground. And also figuring out where the restoration benefits the most number of people and also nature. And the last thing is around future-proofing restoration. We want to restore to last into the future. And I guess this is where the work of my team comes into play, the data and science team at TNC Australia. Here in the next couple of slides, and please bear with me, you'll see a lot of modeling outputs. This is the modeling work that my team is developing to support our restoration practitioners, how to select the best sites for restoring. So, because choosing adequate restoration locations is so critical for success, we actually have developed a custom restoration suitability model to define site selection, to plan for restoration. We have applied it for shellfish, for kelp, but also for multi-species models. It's publicly available. All you need to do is to, I guess, Google TNC restoration suitability model. And it always starts with knowing the environmental tolerances and preferences of the species. And, but it also takes those habitat suitability models one step further, and it includes considerations around conflicting use, like you should not restore where there are mooring areas or navigation zones or private properties. Please stay away from the private properties. The fundamentals of a restoration suitability model, in addition to habitat suitability model, is that it all starts with the same thing. We look at the environmental tolerances, the preferences of the species. The next one is we look at the ecology, like where those ecosystems, where neighboring extant ecosystems that we need to consider. And finally, we use information on conflict and logistical requirements of the restoration, like what I mentioned before, mooring areas, national parks, areas of cultural significance that you don't want to damage with the restoration and other things. And then you combine all of those layers, the environmental, the species, the ecological, and the logistical preference into one map at the very end, which is this restoration suitability model. And here is one of our restoration suitability models in action. This is our first big restoration location, Port Phillip Bay. You see the model in this map there. And basically how you interpret this model is the white areas are unsuitable for restoration of shellfish in this case. And the bluer it gets, the more suitable the location. And then once we come up with these maps, the teams will go and actually check out those preferred locations and verify them, ground truth them, maybe drop a camera to see whether it's feasible to restore at that location. We've also run those models for giant kelp. Using those models, we have identified 8,000 hectares of habitat with moderate to high suitability for giant kelp restoration alone in the northeastern coast of Australia. So a lot of potential here. But in 2023, and I'm pretty sure that the team was talking to Jo at that time, the TNC Seascapes team came to the data and science team with a request on how do we pivot from single to multi-species habitat. So they asked us to develop multi-species habitat suitability models, which we did for 12 species and 1 habitat type, salt marsh. And when we ran those models, applying our restoration suitability modeling approach, we figured out that the south half of Australia had an 18 million hectares of habitat that would be suitable for those species to restore. How that looks like, you can see here on this map. So this is the southern seascape of Australia. I'm showing you one of the layers that we are considering. This is the depth layer with a zoom into the Spencer Gulf and the Gulf St. Vincent in South Australia. So the models that we first developed were habitat suitability models, mechanistic models. So we are using environmental parameters, not the occurrences of species, not presences and absences. It's mechanistic models. It always starts with the gathering of data, depth, salinity, temperature, substrate, wave exposure, but also considerations around the endemic ranges of the species. And now, the interesting bit is that we wanted to simulate this information into the future. So what we did was, once we had those multi-species restoration models and the information with and without endemic range, we projected into 2050 and 2090, considering 5 steps of climate severity, basically from excellent to worse. And we ended up with 26 models under present day conditions, with and without and with endemic range for the 13 species, and 260 models under future conditions. So some considerations when we are simulating climate change, we assume that the tolerances of the species, the tolerances and preferences of the species do not change with climate. What changes are the spatial layers. So we have present day and future layers for depth, salinity, and temperature for the entire Australian continent. We had to keep wave exposure and substrate type the same because we didn't find any data. Now, a word of caution, and that is from my conversation that I had yesterday at the dinner table with Richard Unsworth, and he was asking me like, oh, but have you actually considered heat waves? There is a heat wave currently in Sussex. I had no idea. It's smashing restoration sites. And I don't think that this model is, well, those data sets, data layers that are happening at a continental scale are considering localized events like heat waves. So the recommendation is, if you wanted to do something like that, make sure you include your local context and local data if you have that. Okay, let's have a look at some results. This is the map of the multi-species habitat suitability models, present day, current condition. Let me explain what this bar down there means. So yellow means the habitat is not suitable for any of the species, and the greener it gets, the more species we get. So we were able to find suitability for up to 7 species at the same time that we can co-restore, right? So it's pretty straightforward. Those yellow areas there, ignore them, they're not suitable. And we only included moderate to high suitability, so only a suitability that was more than 62.5%. And from those 18 million hectares of the southern seascape area, we figured out that 45% of that area, so that's 8 million hectares, was actually suitable for 3 species or more, which is a substantial area that we can certainly work with. Now let's go into the future. This is the same, but projected into 2050, considering the worst climate scenario. Business as usual, CO2 emissions as they currently are. The bar now has changed to number of species gained in green and number of species lost in blue. So basically the bluer it gets, the more we lose species, and the greener it gets, the more we actually gain suitability for species in a habitat that wasn't suitable for those species 20 years ago, if that makes sense. Okay, let's go even further into the future. Oh, maybe I should show you the map. Are you guys able to see it? It's kind of a little faint, but basically you see that the number of species lost is mostly on the west coast of Australia, here in Gulf Spencer and St. Vincent. There are some losses. There are some losses on the east coast of Australia. I live in Brisbane. I'm a little concerned. But interestingly, there are those green patches. Oh, check this out. So loss, gain. It's pretty cool. So this is where we actually gain suitability for those species. And if we go even further into the future, well, the blue gets more. We lose more and more species. But interestingly, these areas here still gain actually species suitability. And maybe the interesting thing that I should mention here is that, so this is 2090, right? A lot of blue area, but still, from the initially 45% of suitable habitat for more than 3 species to restore, still 30% of that area is still suitable for those 3 or more species to restore, and that's 6 million hectares. So 6 million hectares is a good area that we can definitely work in. Okay, bear with me, it gets a little bit more complicated now. We were interested to align our restoration priority locations with the areas where the highest benefits to people would be experienced, because at those locations, people will experience the highest impacts of climate change. So we wanted to know where those areas where the coastal erosion is highest, the flooding risks are highest into the future. And also we figured the biggest benefits would be experienced at places where a lot of people live, like the highly populated places and places with a lot of infrastructure. So what we did is we gathered all this data and we put it into a normalized risk-benefit index. So what this risk-benefit index basically means is that here you would experience, this is the places where the highest impact of climate change would be experienced, and this is where the highest number of people are and human infrastructure. So the bluer get, the biggest benefit or risk are. And again, I'm not very happy about this blue stretch here, and especially here in Brisbane, it looks very blue. So risky areas, most of the areas are in this kind of blue-green area, but there are a couple of places here on the east coast of Australia that are going to be pretty much smashed. And because we are guiding the Australian government to restore 30% of priority habitat into the future, we carried out a spatial prioritization exercise. This data is present day only, where we looked at where are the top 30% with and without endemic range of the species. So the green areas are, well, doesn't really matter whether you consider the endemic range, but if you had considerations around that you don't want to restore an East Coast species on the West Coast, you may want to look for this information here that is showing the top 30% with endemic range. And also we modeled the top 30% without endemic range that you barely can see here, a couple of dots of this blue. And the gray, again, never prioritized, don't bother about those areas, they're not suitable. And I have 3 more slides, folks, and then you're done. But bear with me, it's getting very interesting here. Now, we wanted to figure out where those top 30% of priority locations currently and into the future. And the way we answered this question was to look at what is the frequency of a grid cell always being considered, whether we model today or in the future? And we express that as a priority score from 0 to 15. So basically those dark blue areas that we can see, these are the grid cells that are always in the top 30%, no matter how we model the today or the future. And we also carried out this model for 5 or 10% if 30 is too much. Now, this scenario is without considering risk-benefit. When we consider risk-benefit, a very similar picture here. Again, we get really dark colors, but this time we're expressing this in yellow. What I'm going to mention here is that the variability here becomes a little bit more, and the areas where we have this very dark yellow, when we consider risk-benefit, are a little bit less. Now, we take this map and the previous map and combine it into one. So this is a biplot that has both types of information, and bear with me, I'll explain step by step. The x-axis here in the blue gradient is considering climate scenarios, current day and future scenarios. Again, the grid cells that are always in these top 3 during those climate predictions. And the yellow here, the yellow gradient is the same, so current day and present and future, but considering risk-benefit. And where we want to really be is here, this dark green area. So this is where we're pretty safe to restore, because those locations are going to be not impacted by climate change, and they are also going to give you the biggest bang for your buck and contribute to local populations. And we have quite a bit of those areas. All right, we are almost on time. That brings me to my 4 key takeaways for you today. When you're planning to carry out restoration, seascape restoration, you better be climate smart when you're planning, because we know that habitat suitability of marine coastal ecosystems is gonna drop under severe climate scenarios, and your restoration location needs to anticipate that. The second bit is that I hope I was able to give you a bit of a case that the Great Southern Scape is providing a major opportunity to restore ecosystems, multiple ecosystems. There is this 18 million hectares that is currently suitable for marine coastal restoration, multiple ecosystems with some key restoration hotspots. And also, if you wanted to figure out the best places to restore, you need spatial tools to inform and guide your strategic investment. And all you need is multi-species models, future scenarios, and coastal risk benefits. Easy, right? But don't fret, guys, because we are currently in the process of writing up this paper, the whole methodology, and we are going to make all those layers available publicly for you to grab. What I will ask you is be very careful if you're wanting to apply this framework for your local circumstances, because you might be better off using some local data. Remember the heat wave, that information is not reflected in a national continental scale data set. So bear with us as we are getting this paper submitted and the data uploaded. All right, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. If I've put down some resources for you to grab if you want. My name is Elisa Bayraktarov. If we run out of time for questions, just drop me an email, contact, connect, and I will take a picture of you now. Oh.
I think we've got time for a couple of questions.
Okay, cool. All right, questions? Just keep in mind, I haven't run the models myself. All credit goes to Vera Rulands. Vera is not here because she had a little baby 2 weeks ago. So I can't claim anything, but yeah, quite.
Well, I hope she's doing well. But it wasn't actually a question about the model. I was quite interested in the 425 jobs created, and if you had more of a breakdown on what that was.
Yes, we do. So those are jobs with contractors that have helped TNC to carry out this work. Imagine TNC Australia, the entire business unit has exactly 40 staff, and that includes conservation and comms and finance and developers. So we are probably a team of 20, 25 people carrying out a restoration. We can't do this on our own. So we have engaged with a lot of consultants, also with state governments, teaming up with them, actually paying them to carry out the monitoring and get them to help us to restore. So the jobs are, I think it's called the boat drivers, coxswain, the commercial divers, the barge operators, the people who carry those stones, the cleaners for the shellfish that were collected from the restaurants. Often those were volunteers, actually, and some logistics and admin support, I think, is probably giving you a good idea of what those jobs were.
Hi, Elisa. Thank you for your presentation. It was very inspiring. It's impressive how you want to scale up. Do you expect any issues with supplying limestone or, again, the oyster shells?
Ooh, that's a very good question, and I don't have the data, so I'll have to give you my gut feeling. And my gut feeling is telling me there is enough limestones in Australia. There is no shortage in limestones. Better would be to get probably real shells from restaurants, but I think the team has done such an amazing effort to get 100 tons of shells. So we can certainly repeat those activities, I believe. So no considerations here, no concerns.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So now we're going to move on to session 5, and I'm chairing that this morning. And it's all about community-driven conservation. And I was really struck by Brian Angelis's talk yesterday, how TNC's investment in communities really paved the way for them to be able to scale up. First up today is Aline de Silva Cerqueira and Alice Clark, who is going to talk about their work in the Sussex Bay, and they're from the University of Sussex. And the talk is Dealing with Communities, Not For Them, a Transformative Vision for the Sussex Coast.
Good morning. As it happens, pretty much every time I step on a stage, I go completely blank. I forgot everything I was going to talk to you today, but I'm going to tell you what I remember. My name is Aline da Silva Cerqueira. I am the Partnership and Engagement Lead for Sussex Bay, and I am going to co-present this talk today with my colleague Alice Clark from the University of Sussex. And I want to say that I am absolutely delighted to be here at ZSL, a place where I did my PhD a few years ago, and for the first time at the Seascape Symposium. So, okay, let's talk about designing with communities and not for them. So first of all, let me talk a little bit about Sussex Bay. Sussex Bay is a very young initiative. It is a program. It sits within the Aider and Worthing councils, but it is completely externally funded. So we don't receive and don't use any money that comes from public funds. And we have been lucky enough to count with a range of funders, which I'm going to list at the end of my talk. So Sussex Bay is a generational initiative, meaning that it it's been designed to last for and to be ongoing for a long time. And Sussex is one of the best places on the British Isles, and I'm not at all biased. I have been living there for about 20 years now. And this is the first time I work full-time in Sussex. I worked before teaching there, but that's a different story. So from Selseyville to Canberra Sands, along 100 miles of coast. That's the challenge, and the biggest challenge is that we want to generate a big funding over the next 25 years or so, maybe beyond. So we are ambitious, and we are also very hopeful and very hardworking. But the reason why Sussex Bay exists is because well before Sussex Bay, we have noticed, and the reason why Sussex Bay was created as an initiative is because there are quite a few interesting projects and programs and individuals and organizations across the whole of Sussex. And that's brilliant because we don't need to create things from scratch. And the moment Sussex Bay is being created, and that was only about a year ago, we have been approached by so many people and organizations locally, which shows that there is a potential for us to create tightly knit community and a network in the area. So our work is around our blueprint for marine recovery, which is a document that's being led by my colleague, Dr. Louise White, who's not here today, but of which work Alice Clark is an integral part. And in this document, we identify what are our main natural assets. We have been able to develop our Blue Marine Capital lab, which is across a variety of organizations. And our work is around three main pillars, which is research, restoration, and meaningful collaboration. And that's very important because, of course, there is no long-lasting work without collaboration. So we just not aiming to restore nature, but we are aiming as well to restore and create connectivity between and among people, and restore relationships as well, relationships with the natural environment and with our blue marine environment in Sussex. So now you're going to hear more about Alice, and Alice is going to present to you what a community-led initiative looks like, and she's going to talk to you about the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project, which clearly demonstrate what happens when decision makers, researchers, academic researchers, and the community join together around one shared vision.
Hi, so I'm going to first give you a little bit of background about Sussex. So as Ray mentioned a little bit yesterday, until the late 1980s, there were dense kelp beds in Sussex. So you can see from this picture in Worthing, taken in the 60s, how much kelp would wash up on the beaches after large storms. It reaches almost that man's waist, which was normal after big storms, and it was part of the process. As we know, kelp is an ecosystem engineer, so it provides shelter and nursery grounds for a lot of different marine species, and also attenuates wave action, protecting coasts from coastal erosion, and sequesters CO2 from the atmosphere. Since the 80s, we've lost over 90% of the kelp beds. So from these maps, you can see what we estimate the density of the kelp beds looked like in the 80s, and then what we had left in 2019. And this was partly due to the Great Storm of '87, which washed up huge amounts of kelp, similarly to that picture I showed you in Worthing, but this time it coincided with intensified trawling activity in the area, which meant with the kelp gone, trawlers were able to get much closer to the coastlines than they used to be able to, stopping the kelp from coming back. But in 2021, the Sussex Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority introduced the Nearshore Trawling Bylaw, which protects 300 kilometres squared of the coastline, and the aim was to help the regeneration of fish stocks and coastal habitats, including the kelp beds. So why is this community-driven conservation example? The Sussex IFCA put out a public consultation to pass the Nearshore Trawling Bylaw, and the Help Our Kelp video, which was made by Big Wave Productions and narrated by David Attenborough, caused the public to really back this consultation and is what helped to eventually pass it. And then came the Sussex Kelp Recovery Project, which is a partnership between lots of different universities and NGOs and the local community. And so it gives this project a community-wide approach to conservation. And it integrates both scientific and community effort with a long-term vision for local benefit. So now I'm going to tell you a bit about the work I've been doing. So I started my PhD 4 years ago, so just after the bylaw was put in place, and I've been monitoring biodiversity recovery since its implementation. So I've been monitoring 28 sites along the Sussex coastline within the Nearshore Trawling Bylaw. So on the map, it's that pink hashed area, and some sites outside, and some control sites where we still have some kelp. I've been using baited remote underwater videos and environmental DNA for the last 4 years. So we go out every summer in July, and we'll be going out again in about 3 weeks' time. So then we review the bird footage when we're back on land and have Nature Metrics analyze our DNA samples, and then have a bigger picture of the overall biodiversity in Sussex. So far, over 4 years, we've detected over 80 different vertebrate species. We haven't seen a massive change in community composition, but we are starting to detect some slightly different species that we weren't detecting before, such as the short-snouted seahorse or bluefin tuna. And we've also detected some species of conservation importance, like the European eel and taupe shark and some rays, which will all hopefully help promote the conservation of this area for these species. Is this going to work? Yeah. So with the bruvs, we obviously have loads of footage of different species, which we can also help show the rest of the community and the public what is a bit harder for most people to get to see underwater, and so they can still feel connected to this project after having helped pass the Nearshore Trawling Bylaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice, for this great example. So now going back to the Sussex big picture, where we are now. At the moment, we are doing a variety of things. We're trying to be very proactive, reaching out to communities and engaging with existing projects, with existing initiatives, reaching out to councils. And we are listening a lot and forging a network, a very large network of partners. So a few months ago, we led our first the first ever Sussex Bay Ocean Literacy Survey, and we managed to get over 1,800 people responding, and the results are very powerful, which demonstrate clearly to us that people are interested in the ocean. They find the ocean very important, but also it shows a great disconnect because people think the ocean is important, marine life is important, but they don't know how to engage it. They engage with work. They don't really know how effectively to protect it, and they are concerned. So we exist as an organization to try to bridge the gap between knowledge and action, perhaps creating opportunities with the communities to get them to do something and be part of the process of protecting the coastline. And as part of this process of listening and identifying partners, we have created a growing, it is a work in progress map, a stakeholders map, if you like, but actually it indicates a variety of organizations. Some of them are NGOs, some of them are projects, some of them are schools. All of them are interested in engaging with Sussex Bay and want to do something to conserve the ocean. So during the next 3-5 years, we are hoping to scaling up inclusive participation models. Everyone who lives in Sussex has a stake in the coast, and we need to make it more inclusive. We need to be listening to the people who often are not participating in the conversations and are not participating in the decision making. That's very important. Pretty much in every event I go, I don't see the youth voices, I don't see representatives of cultural minorities, and people with disabilities. So everyone has a stake in this. We know the importance of the oceans globally, especially in the decade of ocean science. So it's very important for us to use this movement and continue this momentum to create more, but above all, to engage more people. So now I'm going to show this very short video created by a very famous YouTuber, Dr. Ray Marine, aka Dr. Ray Ward, present here today. You have to like and subscribe, people. So this lovely video was created over the past few weeks, just off our beach from where we live. And if we can't bring people to the ocean, because not everyone is keen or can go to the seashore, we need to bring the ocean to the people. And visuals like this are also very important, a very important part of the communication. We cannot do this alone, so we count with a number of people who work with us. They fund us and they trust us, and I'm very grateful to all of them. So thank you very much for listening, and that's it. I don't know if I have any time for questions.
Thank you. So yes, perfect timekeeping, thank you. So we do have time for a question or two. Open it up to the audience. Yes, there's one at the back there.
Thanks very much. Great presentation, and really great to see a project that's thinking about inclusivity from the start. I'd really love to just understand a bit more about the work that you said you're doing to target representation from underrepresented or marginalised communities. We know the marine sector is one of the least diverse when it comes to ethnic diversity in the UK. I'd just love to know what specifically you're doing to make sure you're reaching those communities that don't have access and face barriers to being part of blue spaces. And yeah, if you could.
The only way to do it is being very proactive. And like this mapping work we are doing is basically mapping what is out there on Facebook, Instagram, what is already in databases of partner organizations, but also participating in public events, fairs, and have a small stall and say, hey, this is Sussex Bay, this is what we do, and have conversations in situ, really. The more I participate, and I participate in a lot of events nowadays, and many conversations, the more invitations arise. And actually, the number of people who actually want to engage and need help to share with us what their aspirations and concerns and difficulties are, it's really large. So, yes, so in short, we need to be proactive, we need to be visiting. Like Sussex has currently is formed of 11 councils. So we literally have a map with these 11 councils, and we have reports from the councils with their demographics, and from the demographics we have an idea of where the main organizations are and what is missing there, and then we try to see how we can engage with those councils with less representation. Does this make sense?
Thank you. Does anyone have a question for Alice?
So, Alice, with the BRAFs, do you have a way to automate the BRAF data processing and the analysis so that volunteers don't have to do hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of watching those videos?
No, not at the moment. We have thought about using AI for it, but haven't got round to training it, because obviously that's also quite time-consuming. So far, we just use the poor undergraduate and master's students, and then I verify all the videos as well.
Thank you. Thank you both for a wonderful talk. I think, obviously, we'll be hearing from Rod later about the amazing AI. So our next speaker today, Danny Renton, is from founded Seawilding up in Scotland. It's a community-based charity that is looking to restore seascapes in Loch Craignish and Loch Broom. And we've got a pre-record.
Hello everybody, my name is Danny Renton. I'm the CEO and founder of Seawilding. And Seawilding is a community-led marine habitat restoration project up in the northwest of Scotland in Argyll. It got going around 5 years ago, and it started because our community of around 500 people here noticed that over the last 30, 40 years there'd been a real decline in biodiversity in the loch. So the likes of wild salmon, grey mullet, herring, native oysters, and these sort of things have all been disappearing. And so the Seawilding is an expression of community interest to try and bring some of these species back and to research how we can do it. So we've effectively turned Loch Craignish into a kind of marine lab to look at best practice methodologies and what's possible. And we focus in particular on seagrass and native oysters. So my first slide here is that's a picture of the loch looking north, and there is a large seagrass meadow on the left hand side. And in Loch Craignish we've got around 5 hectares of seagrass, and in that little chartlet on the right hand side you can see it's in scattered meadows dotted around the loch. But then we have around 80 hectares where we think seagrass should be, and this is Zostra marina, subtidal seagrass. And so those 80 hectares, that's through environmental DNA and also anecdotal evidence. So when we started this project 4 years ago, we were researching the different methodologies for trying to bring back seagrass in the loch. And you all know about the importance of seagrass as a carbon sink, but also as a nursery ground for spawning fish. But this little statement at the bottom of these slides is the most important thing for Loch Craignish. Seagrass beds make up 0.4% of the seabed of the loch and host 68% of the biodiversity, hence the importance of bringing it back. Some of you may never have swum in a seagrass meadow in Scotland. Well, if you're lucky and the clarity is good enough, this is sort of kind of what it looks like. This is Loch Craignich. And again, we kind of refer to it as the sort of coral reef of the west coast. When you swim in the seagrass meadow, it's really like swimming in a sort of wildflower garden. Lots and lots of different types of fish. We see herring, we see skate, we see pollock, we've seen juvenile cod. So again, this just reinforces the importance of seagrass meadows for spawning fish. And of course, as you know, 95% of seagrass meadows have disappeared around the UK coastline, hence the importance of bringing them back. So when we started, we were mentored by Project Seagrass, who've been incredibly helpful to us, and we started trialling lots of different methodologies. Primarily, we harvested seed, very labour intensive, with snorkelers and divers in July and August, harvesting 100,000 seeds a year, and then trialling 9 or so different methodologies, planting out in the restoration areas. And these included things like sort of direct scattering, seed injection, but also planting in Hessian bags. 50 seeds per bag. The problem with it was that the germination rates were very low. And so after 2 years, we started investigating this. There's lots of science going on in the loch. And one of the scientific projects was the sediment analysis to understand why we were getting such low germination rates. And it turns out that a lot of those 80 hectares that I was talking about is actually anoxic mud. And that's problematic for seagrass. So we then had to look for other areas in the loch which are well oxygenated, and those are the areas that we concentrate on now. Our favoured methodology now is something that we imported from Vancouver in Canada, and this is rhizome plantation. It's effectively translocating plants out of the donor meadows, those 5 hectares of donor meadows, and moving the plants out into the restoration areas. So in these donor meadows, the seagrass is very lush. There's around 800 plants per square metre. So we extract a few plants, and then I'll tell you about the process. Next, it involves many volunteers. We have a core team of 4 divers, but at certain weekends in the year, we put the call out. We get lots of volunteers from all around the UK to come and help. We focus mainly on diving now, simply because that means we can get around the tides, and it's just much more efficient. And what happens is these divers go out, extract the plants, and bring them back into our boathouse, where we have lots of volunteers separating each of the plants, and then attaching a steel washer onto each plant. That gives it purchase on the seabed. And then these plants are bundled up in groups of 5 or 10. We're trialling lots of different density trials, and then planted out in the restoration areas. That little map on the bottom right shows you where all these volunteers are coming from. So there's real hunger for this. We're very reliant on volunteers and greatly appreciate their help. This is a little chart of where we're currently planting this year. That pink area is our restoration area. You can see the green area is a donor meadow. So we're enhancing an existing meadow, and that's around 5 hectares that we're looking at the moment. And this is an idea of what it's like, a very short video of its sort of underwater horticulture. So there's a snorkeler planting 10 plants in a bundle every square metre in an area that's sort of mapped out with tape measures. And looking at it aerially, it kind of looks like a hair transplant. So the idea is that within 3 to 4 years, each of these bundles will interconnect and then form a meadow. And if I go to the next little video, so this was what you saw there was planted in May, and this video was taken in September last year. So you can already see the infill that's beginning to happen. So that's been very successful. And as a result of that, this year we're planning to plant 20,000 plants. So we're really scaling up and planting around 1/3 of a hectare to continue up that donor meadow on the left-hand side. And again, just have a look at that again. So the crucial thing here is between May and September last year, we saw a 3-fold increase in shoot numbers and a 5-fold increase in coverage. And so that's really the first time that we've had real success with seagrass after 3 years of trialling all those different methodologies. We're still harvesting seed. We scatter the seed between those little bundles. But it shows that, seagrass, the science of seagrass is still in its infancy, and we're really, still studying how we can do it and what works and how we can scale up. But I think, this particular project is producing some really useful results, which we share with all the other people involved in seagrass restoration in the UK and internationally. I was talking about the anoxic mud, and that is a problem because we want to get on top of that, and we want to plant seagrass in those areas. And so one of the things we've been approached by a marine construction company called Van Oord, and we've been working with them to look at how we can sand cap some of this mud to see whether it can improve the growing conditions. And in the spring this year, we put down 1,000 square meters of sand at around sort of 10 centimeters in depth, impregnated with around 100,000 seeds. And you can see it's a very laborious and expensive process. But if we can make it work, there's a possibility that this might be something that can be done in the future to counter this problem of anoxic sediments. And here is a very short video taken about 2 weeks ago, and you can see some of the seed now germinating. So we have to wait and see, and hope that it grows during the year, survives the winter, and then hopefully that's potentially a way forward for the project. So to kind of sum up on the seagrass, it's a research project. There's lots of science. We work with the Scottish Association of Marine Sciences and various PhD students looking at environmental DNA, looking at carbon capture, looking at sort of the return of biodiversity, I think this is all sort of critical work to try and understand whether we can restore seagrass at scale around the UK. I've mentioned the huge number of volunteers that are involved. We have around 100 volunteers every year, as well as 7 interns. And we're really reliant on this sort of outreach. And the idea with our project is to share our results with other communities. So potentially we can get sort of marine habitat restoration around the inshore rolled out at scale in the future. But also part of this is just advocacy and awareness and telling people about the importance of these species. And so recently we teamed up with a landscape gardener and we went to the Chelsea Flower Show. And this was a picture taken, 2 weeks ago by the time you see this. And that's our garden. It's inspired by the Craignish coastline. And in the front there, you've got a saltwater tank with Zostera marina growing in it. And it got a lot of attention. Tens of thousands of people, I think, came past. It was a huge human tsunami of interest, and it was very gratifying. And most of all, the garden won a gold. So good for us, great for the designer, good for seagrass, and good generally for the cause of marine habitat restoration. I'm going to talk now about native oysters. Well, you all know about native oysters, so this slide may be a little bit redundant, but it's really just showing you that the native oyster is different to the Pacific oyster, the rock oyster, which is the one you normally get in a supermarket or in a restaurant. We're talking about Ostrea edulis, not Cassistrea gigas, and edulis, as everybody knows, was once everywhere, a bit like seagrass. 95% or so has disappeared around the UK coastline. Really important habitat for spawning fish. In the Firth of Forth, there were once sort of 50 square miles of native oyster beds, up to until around 1900, when they'd all been fished out, and until recently, no native oysters have been seen in the Firth of Forth until Restoration Forth came along and started putting them back there, which is exciting news. In Loch Craignish, we have Victorian accounts of vast numbers of native oysters here, and in our surveys, when we started this project 5 years ago, we have found only around 250, some of them very big, almost a kilo in size, but very, very dispersed around the loch and functionally extinct. So the project was to bring back native oysters at scale to recreate those self-sustaining native oyster beds 100 years ago or so. The way we do this, and this is kind of old hat to many of you attending this conference. This is about the ecoservices of native oysters. I might just mention their sort of symbiosis with seagrass. And native oysters remove the nitrates and phosphates, clarify the water very effectively. And seagrass is a plant that needs very, very clear water to function, to photosynthesize. So to have the two side by side is very interesting, and hopefully and will hugely benefit our seagrass restoration. What we do is we buy native oysters in from a hatchery, and we grow them in a floating nursery. So we have around 300 meters of floating cages, and these cages every year we can grow around 300,000 oysters every year. And what we do is we buy them in at fingernail size, we grow them up to a sort of biscuit size, and then we put them on the seabed. And this next slide shows you the sort of 3 stages of growth. And the reason why we do this, as opposed to putting the baby oysters directly onto the seabed, is because they get absolutely hammered by starfish and crabs. But I'll get onto those in a moment. So when they're ready, generally they grow quite quickly in the loch, around sort of 5 to 6 months. We then get teams of volunteers, go out onto the pre-surveyed sites where there's lots of culch, good substrate for the oysters to settle on, and we broadcast them out into the loch. Each of those sacks has around 1,000 oysters, and try and get a density of around 100 per square metre. And this short video will show you what some of these release sites look around 3 years later. So this was recorded in September last year. And so a lot of these oysters are now of a breeding size. They're over 60 millimetre. At best, they're around 34 per square metre. And, you know, it looks like we're beginning to get sort of the formation of an oyster reef there. I think one of the things I would say, though, is that I mentioned the predator problem. And the issue with our predators is we've got an aquaculture facility, a big sea trout farm in the loch, huge numbers of starfish, we think, resulting from that. And the consequence of that is that a lot of our oysters get eaten, and there's a lot of green crab. So of the 350,000 that we've put down on the seabed so far, we reckon around 20,000 remain, but these are of a breeding size. So it's a numbers game. We just got to keep putting them down. But critically, we are now seeing recruitment, and at the head of the loch there's a large beach where we haven't put any oysters down yet. We have around 8 release sites, but not down here. In October we did some surveying on the beach, and we were finding oysters that were newly recruited, around 2 years old. So that suggests that that our population that we've put down is now spawning and reproducing, which is exactly what we want to do. But again, it's a numbers game. We've got to keep on doing it. And one of the challenges of that has been a lack of supply. This is a native oyster, and the Torque, the oyster restoration company hatchery up in Orkney in Scotland, they are producing native oysters, but in very small quantities. They're struggling to get them to breed. Likewise, down in the Morecambe Bay hatchery for the last 2 years has been a little disease. They've been struggling to get them to breed. So the last 2 years we haven't had any stock, which has been very, very frustrating. Fortunately, in August this year, we're expecting to get around 200,000 from the Morecambe Bay hatchery, which seems to resolve some of their problems. And so that's good for us, and we can get this project back on track, because we want to put down around 300,000 every year. But in the meantime, we've been looking at the oysters that are down there, and we've been doing some hydrodynamic modelling, because the important thing is oysters like to spawn in around 16 Celsius of water. The larvae then float around for 14 days or so, and then like to settle on something. So the important thing is to try and work out exactly, you know, what's happening to the larvae when there's a spawning event. And if you look at this little hydrodynamic model here, this is looking at what happens to the larvae over a 14-day period. So it's flushing back and forth around our release sites, and then suddenly you get a spring tide and you can see it flushing out the loch there into Loch Melfort, which also has a restoration project around the corner, so that's very beneficial. But the good thing with this is basically showing is that most of the spat remains in the loch, and certainly with the new recruitment that we're seeing at the head of the loch, that would sort of that sort of ground truth this hydrodynamic model. So moving on, we have also been trying to capture some of this wild larvae in the loch. And we've been putting down spat collectors, and this is sort of mussel shell, scallop shell, old oyster shell in different cages and coupelles and things like that, and hanging 150 of these around the loch to try and capture some of this wild larvae. And then last autumn it then went into the oyster nursery where it's on growing, and we hope to go back to it fairly soon and to see some baby oysters attached to it. And once we see that, we'll then put this culture down into the restoration areas. And if it was a pretty cold year last year, so we're not anticipating great results. However, if we don't get larvae, we at least get this wonderful sort of art installation as well, which looks fantastic when you swim around it underwater. Now I've talked about our oyster restoration projects and our seagrass projects, and I've talked a bit about the science that's ongoing and just what an incredible thing it's been for our community. Huge number of people involved, and it's really embedded in what we want to be doing. We want to be bringing back biodiversity into our sea loch, not just this sea loch, but in other sea lochs all around Scotland, and to be sharing what we're learning with other communities and helping them to do the same. However, we remain massively frustrated about the continuation of scallop dredging and bottom trawling within metres of shore. There's a scallop dredge on the left-hand side and there's a bottom trawl on the right-hand side. This is for bottom trawling for prawns and nephrops, and it continues to go on in Loch Craigness. Despite everything that we're doing, it continues, and we're powerless to stop it. And it's very, very frustrating. And we all know what happens. This is what the seabed looks like after you've dredged it for a few times. This is what the middle of our loch looks like, because it's been dredged back and forth. Where we're doing restoration is out of reach of the dredgers, fortunately. But I talk to my diver friends who've been diving up and down the west coast of Scotland since the 1970s, and some of them say it used to look like the Red Sea. It's now a rake gravel bed. So we really need to address this. I'm running out of time. This is a serpulid reef dredged in Cerqueira in Argyll, literal recovery after 17 years. And this was some pictures taken by a diver in Skye the other day, which was literally the contents of a bottom trawl discarded on the seabed. It's a really appalling practice. We really need to deal with it. If we can get proper marine protected areas in the right places, then we really believe that what we're doing has a chance to scale up, not just active restoration, but passive restoration. We've got 7 interns working with us this year. We had 90 applicants. There's a huge hunger for what we're doing to bring back biodiversity inshore. And we think this is a golden opportunity with biodiversity net gain, with corporate social responsibility monies. There's new finance coming in. There's lots of interest. There's a real need. So, we sound the clarion call for much more of what we're doing around the UK coastline. And I'll end with one other slide which just talks about when the inshore limit in Scotland was lifted in 1984, how within 10 years all the fish landings on the west coast of Scotland collapsed. Finally, this is what we want to bring back. Hopefully I can report back to you in a few years' time. We're seeing many more of these species in Loch Craigness as a result of what we're doing. And if you walk around our loch, this is the little signs which will tell you what we're doing. And do come and visit anytime. Thanks very much for listening, and I'm sorry I can't join you for questions. Thank you. Goodbye.
We're going to move on, and next we've got Ffion Mitchell-Langford, who's going to be talking about addressing the missing link, national parks at land, coast and sea, and she's from the Campaign for National Parks.
Okay, bore da pawb. Good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. I've never been here before, and I think I don't know most of you in this room, so this is a really, really exciting chance for me to say hi and introduce our work, and a special hello to those of us who are joining online as well. So today, I'm going to be speaking about addressing the missing link, national parks at land, coast and sea, and I feel like Lisa teed me up super well yesterday by alluding to the value of national parks, as well as Aline touching on ocean literacy as well. So thank you very much, Aline. So this work is something that Campaign for National Parks are leading on in the next stage, but it's very much in close collaboration and partnership with Blue Marine Foundation, Plymouth Sound National Marine Park, and kindly supported by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation as well, building on work that's been conducted to date around national marine parks. Okay, so first things first, who are we? Campaign for National Parks, for some of you, may not be that much of a familiar name when it comes to the marine space and the marine working world. So this is who we are. We're the only independent charity dedicated to securing the future of national parks here in England and Wales. And our mission is to unite and inspire people to take action for and enjoy wilder national parks. So when thinking about this session theme, community-driven conservation, there are very few examples in the UK that rival that community-driven conservation story that is the establishment of our national park network here in the UK. So born from the post-war scenario of needing to recover, be it recover people's livelihoods, people's health and well-being, and of course, our natural environment, thus a community-born movement began to secure the ability for us to enjoy nature and protect our natural beauty. So when thinking about the social justice element and how social justice intersects with environmental justice, this was essentially all about enabling a right to access our natural environment, a right to discover the incredible and awe-inspiring landscape on our doorstep, and I'm also inclined to maybe add right to restore as well, in the context of the role that communities must and will need to play in order to restore effectively our wholescape or ecoscape. But another elephant in the room, I feel like we're throwing a lot of elephants in the room around, aren't we, after yesterday? The ocean was excluded from that story. So when thinking about how can we be more ambitious, how can we operate better at the larger scale, and how can we better connect sea to source or source to sea, this might be one of the ways that we can do it by seizing this opportunity. So just to provide some hopefully helpful context on the journey that we've been on, thinking about national parks in relation to our marine environment and the work that's been happening there. So the 1930s and 40s, we had national parks consulted and designated on. But whilst it's easy to grab your kids or your friends or your family or your dogs and go out for a walk in our beautiful landscape, bit harder to do that at sea, isn't it? And so the real lack of walkability, or i.e. poor levels of ocean literacy, and the ocean inherently being quite a contested space at the time, sees the ocean completely excluded from our national park story. Fast forward a few decades, how are we getting on? We've got 11 terrestrial national parks now, so amazing. We're really kind of establishing that network on land, and we're just about starting to see the development and introduction of the UK's first network and growing network of marine protected areas. From about 2010 to 2020, this is where we see the really exciting developments around a vision for national marine parks being conceived. Following that, we had the Glover Review that was published, which criticised the genuine access to our national landscapes. But in that same review, also applauded the visionary thinking around a national marine park and what that might look like and what that could mean for communities and for seascape recovery efforts. And lo and behold, Plymouth Sound National Marine Park was established. So thinking about the opportunities that are presenting themselves or have presented themselves over the past few years, So we've got consultations now beginning, but also very much live for new UK-based national parks across England, Wales and Scotland. And we have been promised, I'll caveat that with, we have been just promised national park legislative reform by the UK government. So how might we utilise this as an opportunity to better connect our sea back to the land? Blue Marine Foundation have conducted some really, really excellent work to date around furthering the National Marine Park vision and thinking, and developed and published a variety of reports, which I will be touching on, and now Campaign for National Parks as of last year, and now thinking and leading on the next phase of exploration of this work. So a lot's gone on, basically. So in summary, accessibility challenges and poor levels of ocean literacy, i.e. people's ability to build a connection with and relationship with our local coast and sea, led to the marine exclusion originally in our national park story. The National Marine Park Vision has gathered genuine cross-sectoral interest over the past few decades. So this is something that people are paying attention to and sitting up to find out more about. But what's the need? Why do we need one? We've got so many different types of designations already. And in part, that's slightly been a bit of the problem because we've got a really, really complex designation landscape. We've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of protected areas on land and also at sea and also at our coastal fringes as well. And whilst maybe a lot of you in this room think, oh, it's not really that complicated, is it? I get it, I understand it. Well, many of you are marine experts, right? So when we're thinking about social justice, environmental justice, ownership, who gets to interact and contribute to restoring these spaces, for the average person living amongst communities, it's really, really difficult to engage with this, as it is difficult to engage for some stakeholders that are operating and depending on these places for their livelihoods. So national marine parks offer a mechanism to support our existing marine protected area network and enabling national landscapes, so not just national parks, but national landscapes as well, to exist across land, coast and sea and start to help address that gap between sea and land governance. So in addition to kind of ecological and governance and that management element in terms of need, we also have a socio-cultural, socio-economic need as well. So our coastal communities are some of the most deprived in the UK, okay? People in coastal towns are more likely to report bad health, lower qualifications, experience high rates of unemployment. And these are the people that we are expecting to work with us. These are the people that are exposed to the seascape recovery projects and work that we are doing at their doorstep. So we have an ethical and moral obligation to consider how we can involve communities in a really meaningful way and how our efforts can be done with, but also how we can enable them to be done by communities rather than just to. And barriers still very much persist, as I'm sure I don't have to tell many of you. But what is it? What on earth am I talking about? Some of you might already know what the definition of a national marine park is. Some of you might have been involved in the work previously to shape the definition of what a national marine park is. And this was the outcome of some of that work. So this is just one of the reports that I mentioned that was led by Blue Marine Foundation previously. I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at this afterwards, or if you drop me an email, I'd be happy to share all of these resources with you. But through some co-designing and collaborative processes, this was the collective definition that was reached across a variety of national stakeholders. So a national marine park is an expansive seascape of national importance, where the priority is to promote public awareness and understanding of coastal and marine heritage and seascape recovery, enable recreational enjoyment and realise environmental and socio-economic benefits for coastal communities. Extremely ambitious when it comes to a definition, right? Very all-encompassing. But to be quite honest, we're in a state now where we've got to go big, because otherwise what's the point? We're not really going to make much of a difference. So building on that definition, also working with this collection of national stakeholders, a variety of potential benefits were also identified as part of those workshopping activities. And these were just some of the key things that were coming up. So the element and opportunity for national marine parks around celebrating our heritage, connecting people better with the sea. So that really speaks to this really strong and rapidly growing ocean literacy agenda that we're seeing sweep across the UK currently. Engaging local communities, but enabling and creating the end entity that will allow for place-based decision-making in a really meaningful and equitable way, promoting balance and collaboration between the different types of sea users and visitors, and working to enhance existing conservation designations as well. Let's break that down even more into bite-sized chunks. So very simply, the purpose of a national marine park, or a national park at land, coast and sea, is to connect people with their seascape, to share in a sustainable future. And those potential benefits have essentially been translated into the suite of objectives that we can see up here. So where are we now? Giving you a bit of an overview on what's happened up until this point. And this slide essentially illustrates our current thinking now. So for those of you who were familiar with national marine parks before, prior to stepping into this room, the first thing you might think about when you hear the phrase or the term national marine parks is Plymouth. Plymouth Sound, you know, that's what's happening in Plymouth. Plymouth is the one and only national marine park. And yes, that is true for now, but it is one pathway to achieving and exploring and establishing national marine park status. So we've done a lot of work recently to really start to develop our thinking and looking beyond, very much learning from what's been going on in Plymouth and thinking about how we might scale that up. Because if one thing's for certain, there is never going to be one size that fits all when it comes to national marine parks. So how might we ensure that there are a variety of pathways available depending on the place-based context and need? So first up on the far left, we've got voluntary self-declaration. This is what's happened in Plymouth and what Plymouth Sound has pursued down there. It relies very much on kind of bottom-up interest, community involvement, but critically political will. The political will was just so tangible down there and was a really, really key element that saw Plymouth Sound to be established. Next up, we've got voluntary extension. So this is what it says on the tin, speaks to the voluntary extension of an existing coastal national landscape to extend seaward. That could be a national landscape, it could be a national park specifically. And we don't have an example in the UK of where this is happening because all of this thinking and all of these ideas are still very, very new. But there are some really promising conversations that are going on with national landscape teams around the UK that are themselves exploring the possibility of extending voluntarily into the sea to become a national marine park. Next up, we've got the legislative route. So this speaks to more kind of not independent of government decision-making, which the voluntary end speaks to, but legislation is looking at how we might change and create legislative reform to allow existing national parks to just be across land, coast and sea. So legislative extension, thinking about how coastal national park authorities like Pembrokeshire Coast might just extend into the sea. And thinking about new UK national parks as they come in, because I'm very optimistic that they will, it's just a matter of time. How can we enable them to just exist from the very beginning across land, coast and sea? Now, regardless of whatever pathway is pursued, the one golden thread that ties all of these pathways together are the guiding principles below. But in addition to what, in terms of the specific pathways that can be pursued, a really important element of national marine parks is the journey to get there. It's about the process, it's about the how. And just as with national parks, right at the beginning of their journey, on land, we need to consider how we might enable and carry forward that community-born movement into the way that we consider and explore and pursue national marine parks. And this is the process that was developed, again, previously through the Blue Marine Foundation work and is available in the reports that I can share with you. But this is essentially a step-by-step guide that we share with communities, with local place-based stakeholders that are interested in exploring or pursuing a national marine park and what that might mean for them. So we've got understand place and purpose. What are the needs? What are the challenges of that place? Where might national marine park status aid? Explore environmental and socio-cultural benefits and challenges. Beware of the gaps in terms of regulation, in terms of boundaries. How might that enable connectivity between sites? Engage national and local seascape and marine experts, and so on and so forth. So what is our focus for the next year at Campaign for National Parks? So these are the key areas that I'll be working on with our partners and with other stakeholders that are interested. So we're going to be working on securing political support. So we've established a National Marine Park Political Champions Network, which excitingly is growing pretty rapidly and has got cross-sectoral and cross-party support so far, which is brilliant. Secondly, through knowledge exchange and meaningful engagement, we're going to be increasing awareness and appetite and opening up that conversation more broadly as to what a national marine park could involve. More on that in a second. And we're also developing our understanding a lot more. There is so much that we still don't know. So how might NMPs deliver for coastal communities and the conservation objectives that we're all trying to achieve? And this is just one of the ways that we're delivering on those outcomes. So CMP commissioned independent researcher Natasha Bradshaw to actually sit down and conduct some really in-depth interviews with all of our existing coastal national park authorities. And I don't have time to go over this in too much detail, but the one really key important take-home message is the appetite is there. National park authorities understand the logical element of extending into the sea. So the appetite is there. So how might we build on that, utilise that as an opportunity and nurture that and work with them going forward? So just to wrap up, I just wanted to extend a really open invitation for you all to engage with us on this and participate and get involved in working with us. And one of those ways is through the National Marine Park Alliance. So again, we've spoken a lot about alliances, haven't we? So here you go, have another one. But joking aside, actually a lot of the stakeholder engagement that we have done to date has evidenced the need for creating this kind of space, to form an inclusive UK network for the open exploration and development of the UK's National Marine Park vision. And again, we need to really start thinking about who is this for? All of our work, all of our efforts, who is it for? Because it's certainly not just for the people within this room or joining us online. So how can we better bridge the gap between ourselves and the people that will be living and breathing in these wholescapes for years to come? So we're launching the Alliance on Wednesday, the 25th of June. Obviously, it's free. We would really love for you to be there. And if you scan that QR code, it will take you straight to our registration form where you can find out more. And then hopefully we'll see you on the 25th. Beyond that, if you've got any ideas, any opportunities, anything that you think, you really need to be considering this. Do you hate the idea? Maybe you do, but I really want to know, okay? I want to understand why. What are the barriers? So that's my email address. Please do get in touch. It would be really great to hear from you. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you so much, Ffion. We've probably got time for one question.
Thanks, Ffion. Brilliant. Right at the end there, you said some of the national parks are interested in, or the coastal national parks are interested in the conversation around extending. Now, one of the primary purposes of a national park, or one of the primary functions, is as a planning authority, just like a local authority. How do those national parks that are interested in further exploration think that their role might extend into the sea from a planning point of view?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So coastal national park authorities across the UK, one of the key things that came out of the research is actually there's not really a clear understanding on, or perhaps awareness of the boundary, first and foremost. So many coastal national parks you think might all share the same boundary when it comes to planning, but that's not the case. So some of them extend to low mean water, for example, some of them extend to high. And I think when it comes to planning, and this isn't my area of expertise, David, so I'd probably have to go away and consult the research a bit more. But I think they see it as an opportunity to better connect with the planning and management that's happening at shore and across our inshore waters and offshore a bit better than is currently allowed through the existing national park legislation. I feel like that was a really rubbish answer, but I think it was. But let's talk about it more afterwards.
Thank you. So unfortunately, Louise had a member of her family taken very suddenly ill and can't be with us today. But I am very haphazardly going to stand in for her. So Louise MacCallum is the Blue Marine Foundation project's project manager for the Solent Seascape Project. And she's amazing and is very much driving our community work. So I'm going to just give you overview some of her slides, but I just wanted to flag up some of the things we've been doing in the Solent Seascape Project in terms of our community-driven restoration. So I think most of you know about the Solent Seascape Project already. It's a multi-partner, multi-million-pound project funded by the ELSP and co-funded by East Head Impact. It's a recognised action of the UN Ocean Decade. And our vision is to protect and restore the Solent, tipping the balance of the Solent seascape from a degraded state to a naturally expanding, connected and productive ecosystem. And there's an asterisk there because that was our vision as we started as a partnership. What we want to do is develop that vision properly with the community and co-create that and expand it. Our project's got 5 main streams, one of which is active restoration, and you'll hear later on from Dr Luke Helmer, who's been leading the monitoring programme in terms of all the data. And we also do active restoration at many sites across salt marsh, seagrass, oyster reefs and bird nesting sites. So it's very exciting and it's very ambitious. And we're just starting it off. And the whole idea of the Solent Seascape Project, it's the beginning of a long-term and it has a huge legacy in the area. So if we're going to do that, we need to make sure we hand it over to the custodians and people in the Solent. We do quite a lot of science. I lead that. eDNA, acoustics, a lot of biodiversity surveys, but we're not going to go into detail about that here now. It's quite cool though. We also are working with policy and finance because the main barriers are really sort of regulation and financing nature. And again, I'm not going to go into detail there. What we're going to just talk about very briefly is the community engagement. We have an amazing army of marine champions that are engaged with the work we do, particularly through Project Seagrass and the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, which are both incredible organisations and so good at community engagement. And it's the Wildlife Trust that leads the engagement stream of our project. And coming to the last strand is better protection and management. And I just want to give a couple of slides on what we've been doing around that before we hand over to Bill. And as part of the Solent Seascape Project, we really want to have a long-term Solent recovery plan. So we've done an incredible amount of work, I say we, led by Louise and others, to really engage with stakeholders across the Solent seascape, socioeconomically and ecologically. And we want to develop a long-term seascape recovery plan that is co-created and implemented with stakeholders supporting the better management of existing Solent habitats. And the first step to get there is to know where we are and what we need to recover. Oh yes, see, this is the one of the many, many workshops we've held across the whole of the Solent on the Isle of Wight in different places, bringing in stakeholders from all the stakeholders to come and co-create and input into both the nature recovery plan and the state of nature report and the recovery plan. One thing I would say that we did have a slight issue with stakeholder fatigue because there have been so many projects starting on, and we're asking people who are really busy, you know, they're working in, could I say it, cash-strapped government or regulatory organisations or charities, and we're asking them to take whole days to come and input to this. And so I think there was a bit of a sense of like, you know, you are asking a lot of us, even though they want to be involved in it. So we do have to think about stakeholder fatigue sometimes. And I think that's something that us as practitioners and restorers need to make sure we talk to each other so we're not wearing our stakeholders out. That's a side note. The series of workshops and in combination with a lot of work done by ABP Mayor to create this Solent State of Nature report. There's a non-technical summary, volume 1, which is the main report, and a volume 2, which is appendices, which is complete transparency about where all our data comes from. And it's a depressing read, I think is the headline, really. Most of the Solent habitats and species are struggling, with many having suffered dramatic declines. And here's some of the headlines across the different main habitats we're looking to explore in terms of the directions, the current mapped area and the trends and directions they're going in and current status. This is a fantastic picture of the salt marsh restoration work we're doing, a trial which Luke led, which is very exciting. And so this Data Nature report is being used as a tool to engage our community. And we've also developed this State of Nature Data Explorer, which everything that underpins this Data Nature report is available on this data portal. And so it maps all the habitats from every single information source we can find, published and unpublished, and it maps all the different pressures and layers on top of each other. So, and this is open for everyone to use. So this is the beginning of the legacy to help with that state of nature recovery. So, and the other way we're engaging is a very cool thing. We've got a resident artist who's a folk singer, which is very exciting and is doing lots of cool stuff.